Hello folks, my name is Michael Prinke. I am the Technical Director for Terrain of Magical Expertise, and this is going to be a process video on how we put together areas for the game. As you can see, it's kind of an isometric 2D Paper Mario or Super Mario RPG style kind of game. This is Jacksoni Jungle. This is one of the first areas in Jacksoni Jungle, kind of the gateway to the rest of the level. And we're just going to delete the whole thing. Bye! UI 2, go away! Now the game can never be completed. No, I'm kidding. I'll show you why we're doing that in a minute. This is Jacksoni Jungle Room 1. So when we build these levels, we actually put them together in a map editor called TileEd, which is considerably simpler and cleaner and less messy than trying to mess around in the Unity hierarchy. It is a tile-based editor. It can be configured to work with isometric perspectives as well as top-down 2D kind of stuff, and also side-scrollers. Pretty much anything you want to do that could be tile-based you can do in this program. It's free. You can pick it up in at this URL, www.mapeditor.org. You can kick in a donation. I would highly encourage you to do that because it's a very, very nice program. But anyway, basically the process for building levels is to lay out tiles layer by layer. The way we have them set up is each of these is a 128 pixel tile with the top half representing the walkable area and the bottom half being the footprint of where the tile ends up going. So if I take this block here and put it on floor 2, let's go ahead and make a floor 2 just for demonstration purposes. Each of these has to be offset vertically by a number of pixels equal to half the size of one of these tiles, so they're 128. If I offset vertically by negative 64 pixels, then I will be laying on top of floor 1, like so. And you can see the footprint lines up with where the top of the last set of tiles goes. And that lets me basically just fill in this whole layer. And I can do that layer by layer by layer, stacking tiles on top of each other. It gets a little disorienting at first as you try to decipher what layer you're on and where what the offset should be like. I'm up at negative 128 pixels. You can see the line on the grid is offsetting further and further up as I do this. I don't know why negative goes up. I think that's something you can configure, but we just kind of work around it. And now I've got this nice little fort that I've put together. So that's more or less how we build up levels. You can see we've got a nice variety of tiles, and Chris more or less places these manually as he builds these out. You know what? I'll go a little bit further than this. I will make a set of stairs as well. Let me see here. So stairs can be a little challenging. But I think what I need to do is put it right about here, maybe? No. I think that's actually it. Let's hide this for a moment. Yeah, I think that's actually it, and what we usually do with these is stick something in between those stairs to kind of fill the gap. The stair sprites might need a little work, but you get the idea. And now I just save that, and I can export it into a file inside of Unity. It exports as a JSON file, and that's a relatively human-readable kind of format. It looks a little bit something like... Wait for Visual Studio to open up. Visual Studio always takes its time. So this is a little bit what the map files look like. They're basically an array of objects set out in the coordinates. There's a width and a height to each floor that tells it how the coordinates should be read. And every one of these has an index number for which tile gets filled in. You can see that some of these are a bit sparse, especially on the less populous sides. But if we look at floor 1, that one's pretty dense. So you see tile 102, 103, all of these getting used a whole bunch. And now if I go to the level, I go to the scene info script that I've got kind of placed inside of the level, and it has a series of tile maps placed in it. These are special files that we made to wrap around the tiles, and we have an importer that outputs each individual tile as an object with a sprite renderer. We don't really need those anymore. And with a special module called the ISO Builder module. What this thing does is it assigns to each tile a geomorph. What's a geomorph? Well, it's just a 3D piece of geometry. All of the collision in our game is three-dimensional. We aren't using a 2D collision system. We are projecting the isometric world based on a 3D world, and every single tile we've got has something assigned to it to tell it what kind of collision it's supposed to have. So you can see here there's, dozens of tiles. These are all automatically imported from a sprite sheet that we've got and slotted into this file that has a list of these tile prefabs. And each one of these in this array, its index corresponds directly to an index number inside of the JSON file. So all I have to do now is hit process JSON, and there's our level, complete with the little fort. And would you know it, I actually did set up the stairs correctly. You'll notice that there's a little wall set up around the world. That's automatically generated based on the arrangement of the geomorphs so that you can't go out of bounds, so to speak. I suppose if you ever glitched out the physics in some way to be able to hop over the walls, you could probably go out of bounds, but there isn't a jump button. There aren't a lot of opportunities to fall over things. So the reason it's set up like this, and you can see the sprites set up over here, a couple of things are a little bit odd about the way the mushrooms are rendering. We can fix that in a little bit, but yeah, basically this corresponds directly to this in some way. The camera does not render the geometry. It doesn't render the collision. It only renders the 2D background, and then the 3D stuff kind of puppeteers what's going on over here. And to demonstrate what that's like, I'm going to take and drop in a player start. That's the object that determines where the player begins inside of the environment. Give Unity a moment to catch up with itself. It does like to take its sweet time, especially when you've just started it up. Anytime now, Unity. This is just how the play-in editor works. Sometimes it's a little bit slow when you've left it for a while. When you've played it a bunch, it tends to keep all the necessary information in memory, but when it's booting up, it just takes forever to do. I might as well talk about the system that's going to be loading up in a moment. So player starts are a spot where it automatically spawns the player. And then the player themselves automatically spawns any party members that are in the party manager script, which is a different script that kind of manages a bunch of background information about what party you've got set up. There's a whole bunch of gameplay managers that get set up when the game initializes, and they manage just a bunch of background information. There's one that handles turning on and off your ability to move the character and inputs. There's one that handles music and sound effects. There's one that handles scene loading. There's just a bunch of utility scripts that are used very, very often that are relatively invisible to the player, but that are necessary in order to make the game work. And scene info itself actually has a lot of tie-ins with that, in that it gathers up a list of the player starts in the level, and then picks one to spawn the player on. The scene manager, the scene loading manager, has some information about what scene you're loading into and which specific player start it's supposed to start the player off on. Without that information, it will just pick the first player start in the list, which tends to be the most recently placed one in the level editor. You'll understand what I mean when I get around to loading up player starts based on TileEd. And man, Unity is taking its time here. Maybe I will cut this portion of the video so that oh, and just like that, with a threat, we're actually allowed to play. Here we are in Jacksoni Jungle, and as you can see, we can just walk right up this and walk around on this wall. And if I go over to scene, you can see where Alpha and the White Hat are located in the actual world space, and you can see that we've got we've even got a nav mesh set up for navigation purposes for AI. And yeah, it's pretty much one-to-one what's going on the isometric projection versus what's going on in the 3D environment. The reason we did this was an early. This was probably the first really tangible progress we made on the game when we put this together. I tried in previous isometric-based games that I worked on to set up the collision in 2D space, and that involves a lot of really odd collision on characters where all the collision is on their footprints instead of being something more intuitive. And it more or less precluded us from ever having drops or walk-unders or bridges or anything. Up, Alpha got stuck up there. Come on, Alpha, come on down. You know, basically we could walk behind things, but we couldn't fall off of them or go underneath them or walk through tunnels or anything like that. And it was a real pain in the butt to fake anything like that. So I made the executive decision on this project to use actual 3D collision so we could simulate that sort of thing more accurately. So now I'm going to just take White Hat and put them up a little bit higher on the screen, unpause, and there you have it. White Hat just drops very naturally. You know, this was in order to deal with potential use cases where the characters might jump off of ledges or might fall through holes or anything like that, just to make it a little bit easier to handle that kind of thing, because doing that with 2D collision and trying to fake it is way more of a pain in the butt than you think it is. I was a little worried that having all these individual tiles kind of acting as voxels in this world was going to be something difficult to compute, but it turns out box colliders kind of batch themselves as one piece of collision. So it actually runs very, very smoothly. And this is the system that's been running ever since the demo for the Kickstarter project. So that's more or less the basics of how this works, but let's do a couple of more advanced things now. Let's rig up the teleporter and whatnot. So I've got Jacksoni Jungle here. I might as well get rid of floor 2 and floor 3 because they're not actually supposed to be there. Nowhere to the fort. And now I'm going to make a different kind of layer. I'm going to make an object layer. Floor 1 triggers. And that's going to be offset -64 pixels. We do these offsets always in -64 pixels. So you see it lines up with the edge there at the top of the telepillar rather than the bottom of the telepillar. If we didn't do that, it would be like penetrating through the bottom of the telepillar. And now I'm going to make a trigger here. A little bit hard to see since it's gray, so I'm going to take and set the color, make it yellow. That's what I usually do for kind of neutral triggers. I'm going to make another one right here. And while I'm at it, I'll use the select tool to widen it a bit. So in addition to having definitions for tiles, we have definitions for objects in the game, including triggers, enemies, all that sort of thing. We're going to go down a good number of the different types of objects. And I forget exactly which one of these is Teleporter 1 and Teleporter 2, but I'm just going to wing it. Let's see, I expect this one leads somewhere else. I think this one is the gateway to one of the areas in the general Thimicola Field region, or the general Edodes Woods region, and this one probably leads to room 2. And let me take a look at the scene names here. You can filter based on scene, which is nice. So O1 and O2 for this, room 1, room 2. Good, we actually have these all one word, capital letters. Whoops, don't mean to put that in type. Type is teleporter. And then we have, let's see, room. That's where we put that information. And then we have targets. We put the name of the player start that we want to target when the player enters that teleporter. And that's all the information we need for that teleporter. This one, we'll go ahead and put the fields for it, but we won't fill them in. This one will be kind of a dummy. So now this one will target player start 01. This one will target nothing. And then on top of all that, I need to put in a player start. For this, I use a series of generic icons. I've kind of got an icon tile set that I've imported into this that I can just use for catch-alls like this. Let me see, which one? Yeah, the controller is what I usually use for player start. Make that a little bit bigger, just so it's nice and easy to see. That'll be player start 01. Type is player start. And that'll be player start 02. And that should be more or less the setup that I need for the teleporters in this room. You can see it's really easy to just draw these boxes and fill in their parameters and stuff, and you can put custom properties on any object, any tile that you place. can have custom properties, and that all goes into the JSON file, and I can teach the importer to read all of this information and assemble objects according to it. So now I go to Jacksoni Jungle Room 2, and this one is a little bit more detailed. Let's take and create, let's see, I want to be on top of floor 3 here for this one, so floor 3 triggers. Let's see, floor 3, 128. I believe that's, no, it's not 192. It is, yeah, it is 192. Oh yeah, it does line up correctly. Never mind, I was right. Ha! Oh, that'll teach me to second guess my own math. Make another trigger here. Let's see. Set this to yellow just for the sake of making sure that's correct. And then add player start. Whoop. Make sure to insert an image instead of another trigger. I could do it as a trigger. I could just insert a trigger here that's like minuscule and name it a player start, and it'll still parse it as a player start. But it's definitely better practice to have distinct visual representations of these things. And it doesn't matter what icon I use, by the way. That's strictly for the purposes of understanding what things look like in the level editor. Now let's see, floor 3 has the healing station, so that's another trigger that I'm going to want to put in. And you can see it kind of hides itself underneath the healing station, so I gotta give it a little bit of extra padding, just to make sure that it's visible. And I need to double check something really, really quick in my docs. I've got a little guide to all of these different object types in the game and the correct markup and procedure for them. So you can see this is what I've got in terms of internal documents that explains all of the properties for these things, and it's good practice to keep documentation like this so that you don't get confused about how everything works. But basically, if I put the type healing pool on the healing pool, it will act as a healing pool. Probably going to be a little bit silly when I try to interact with it, but for right now that'll work fine. And then I gotta make sure, is it floor 2? Is it floor 1? Yes, it's floor 1. To make an object layer for floor 1, and then make a trigger for that. Once again, set the color. I wish I could have like default color sets, but why complain about the world's most convenient tool? Teleporter, add room, Jacksoni Jungle 3, target, and we do it like this because it's just much cleaner to place these icons and these objects and mark them up in here as opposed to marking them up inside of Unity. It can be a real pain in the butt to click through the array of objects inside of that scene, especially when it's very, very populated and dense with tiles. It doesn't always know which one you want to click when you've got so many objects overlapping each other. Let's see. And that should get us set up with the basics. And we will go over enemies in a moment. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this ninjant. Sorry, Scott. For demonstration purposes, you know? So save that. Export it as room 2. Hit the export button on this one. Yes, accept the changes. You can see now that it added the trigger. It's got all of this information that was not there before. And now I go over to Jacksoni Jungle Room 2 in here. I will actually hit the re-import button. And now you see that it's added the teleporters automatically. And it'll even make sure that the player starts that are put in are centered. And now I got to do the same thing over in Jacksoni Jungle 2. I'll probably use that as an opportunity to pick up let's go ahead and delete all of this. Delete the dummy party there. We've updated our process a lot so that a lot of things in this environment set themselves up automatically when we hit import. The goal of this whole system is basically one object that I want to save. Where is the backdrop camera? There it is. Dang phone, I'm recording. I'll actually go ahead and copy the backdrop camera, because I deleted the backdrop in the other scene like a fool. So delete all this. So as I was saying, we set this all up so that as much of the process would be automatic as possible. Oh, looks like something got a little bit messed up. You can always tell when it has an error. What did it do here? Process teleporter. So it hit the teleporter and didn't know what to do. That means that the entity library is... Nope, it's there. What on earth happened here? Process again. Let's see if it hits the same problems. So what is it doing here? Properties room to string. So I must have put a typo in. Let's double check that. Oh, this one doesn't have its... I forgot. Yeah, okay. Let me double check this. There we go. Oh, 01. That's what happens if you don't include requisite components in the properties, as it'll give you an error and tell you what's missing. Third time's a charm, and now like magic, there's still an error. Oh, because I didn't export it, that's why. Merely saving the file doesn't do everything. You have to export the JSON as well. That's easy to forget. And like magic, it actually works. So, like I was saying, we designed this in such a way that we wanted this to be as straightforward as possible, so that, you know, anytime we want to update a scene, we can just hit the re-import button and fix things. Like this player start can probably stand to be fixed. It's probably got an erroneous height setting, but it's really easy to just do manual corrections if need be, if there's ever an error in terms of importing any of this stuff. So now all I should have to do... You can see how many blocks there are going through this hierarchy and why it's not practical necessarily to... And I got rid of the backdrop camera again. There it is. Oh. Put it somewhere a little more sensible. There we go. But you can see how easy it is to just get this geometry back. Now let's go back to Jacksoni Jungle 01 and give it a quick test run after replacing the backdrop camera. That is a separate camera that renders on a layer behind the world geometry, and that makes it that makes everything look a little bit more attractive. And yeah, we will fix these mushrooms in a minute. So Play in Editor does tend to have a lot of overhead compared with playing in the actual standalone game. So sometimes it gets a little bit choppy the way that it renders in here, but that's mainly due to a bunch of extra stuff that the editor's got going on, like the profiler and the log output and everything like that. So now we hit the teleporter. Whoops. Build settings, gotta put Jacksoni Jungle in the build settings before it can load anything. And those are actually all in underscores, so I've got to do another correction. Probably should have made sure that I had that all correct before hitting the play button. Keep forgetting that this is a convention that I've got, that any number has an underscore associated with it, and that keeps it relatively consistent how you write stuff. But it's been like a week since I imported any scenes, so you gotta keep momentum, or these little facts about how things get built float out of your head. That's one of the reasons it was so important to be working on this project in a full-time capacity. Okay, build settings are all fixed. I can hit process JSON and that's all fixed. Might as well take a look at that Room 2 teleporter and see if that's on a silly... Yeah, the vertical offset wasn't set. That's why it penetrated through the floor like that. Fix that little bug while we're in here. Hit export. Go on back. Process this. Might as well load up Jacksoni Jungle 2. Process that. Oh, whoops. That's hilarious. Okay, I can't do it that way. Unload. Remove. I thought I might be able to process two scenes at once, but unfortunately not the case. There we go, and that even corrected the placement of that trigger. So now everything should be hunky-dory. A big part of testing this game, by the way, is just running between all the teleporters and making sure that they transition from scene to scene correctly. In any game that you play, by the by, it should not surprise you to think that there might be dozens of testers doing a job as menial as just walking from scene to scene and making sure all of the teleports are loaded correctly. And I did it again. I forgot to export before I fixed up Jacksoni Jungle 2. And this is something that I've had to deal with on every game that I've worked on. Is just making sure that something as menial as scene transitions works correctly. So now that's targeting the right scene. We go back to 01. You can see now Unity is loading up super, super quick. Doesn't take nearly as much time once it's been warmed up. So now we can walk around here with our friend Alpha. Teleport into the next room. Here we are. Make sure we can teleport back. And yes, everything has to be double-checked to see that it works in reverse, as well as... now, what the heck? What on earth is going on? This is like GDQ, where people go, that's never happened before. It's surprising how GDQ mirrors... I'm just going to put the underscore in myself now, because that's annoying me. It's kind of funny how speedrunners mirror developers in weird ways. That's never happened before. That's famous last words of many a programmer. And now we'll actually go to Jacksoni Jungle 1. There we go. And yes, doing that is somebody's day job. Just making sure that you can move back and forth between scenes is something that somebody has to do for a number of weeks on any given project. That's a little funny. I know why that is. That has to do with the rendering on the camera. So if I take the main camera and I just pull it back a bunch, then all of that renders correctly. So that's an odd little quirk of the system that I got to make sure the camera is far enough away. It has to do with the way that the layers on the tiles are set automatically. But now we've got the healing pool. Works correctly, doesn't need any special setup. It just works. All because I just put a trigger here that said healing pool. And then we've got that telepillar, which leads to Jacksoni Jungle 03. So before I forget, I'm going to take the camera in Jacksoni Jungle 2, because now we're back in 01. Could probably just stand to take all of the cameras in the game and pull them back like this. Because it's an orthographic camera, it basically has, you know, unlimited depth. And the size is just a constant box. And that's the difference between that and a perspective camera. It makes everything look Kubert-esque, where there isn't really any illusion of depth to anything. So that is the basic scene transition setup, finally. Beg your pardon that it took a while, but yeah, the job really is like that. You really do jump between these programs like that, looking for little bugs and minor mistakes that often. When you get into a groove, you make less and less of them. But as you can see, we've got this set up in such a way that it's basically automatic. The importer has definitions for all of these objects and just places them according to a series of rules that have been given and according to the coordinates inside of TileEd. And it's just a very, very clean process where if I ever get anything that's got like a bug in it, I can just open up TileEd and hunt for conventions that are off and, fix them, export, hit the import button, and it'll all just work. And that works even when I'm dealing with, like, enemies. So I'm going to put some enemies back in here. I'm going to go ahead and put in Ninjant. This is a little tile set that Scott put together that just has, placeholder names and stuff. Again, this doesn't really matter what the visual representation looks like. It's kind of just there for our convenience as designers to know what we placed and where. So now I'm going to draw a little path. And what the heck? Let's make another one here. Can't put them around healing pools. That is a development rule. Anything that is in relative proximity to a healing pool is a safe zone. So this whole platform here, we just have a rule where we don't put enemies in it. No patrol paths, nothing. What would be another cool kind of enemy to put? What the heck? Let's place a Fuller Roach. There we go. Put him right about there. And I'm going to make this one a little bit erratic. I'm going to put a path here for this guy to bounce around. Type monster. And then to hook them up with AI, we have specially pre-made behaviors that we give them that tell them how to interact with the environment around them and how to interact with the player and stuff like that. We have a relatively short list of behaviors, mostly patrolling-based behaviors right now, but we can get a lot of mileage out of them. So I'm going to put in path. Call that a path there. And if I just put the name of the path that he's going to follow in there, that's what he's going to do. He'll use this path to determine how he moves around. And that's, all despite us having NavMesh capability in here. The reason for that is it's just much easier to tell monsters when we want them to patrol, to put in a bunch of nodes telling it where to patrol to, as opposed to giving it a series of coordinates on a NavMesh. The NavMesh is going to be used for dynamic navigation. So if they're chasing the player, or they need to return to their home position, or there's an obstacle of some sort between them and a path node that they need to get to, then basically that'll let them navigate around that sort of stuff and be a little bit smarter. So once we've got the NavMesh stuff re-implemented correctly, things like Alpha getting stuck on ledges and stuff, that's not going to happen. He'll just dynamically navigate through the whole environment to reach White Hat. But that's more what it's for than doing simple patrols. It's a good idea to minimize the use of dynamic navigation as much as possible. Not because it's overly expensive, but because it's just cleaner that way for simple behaviors that we want to be very, very predictable. So I've got the Fuller Roach. I need to give him a behavior. I'm going to give him AI Patrol Random. That's going to be the patrol type that I'm going to have him do. And what that means is he is going to randomly move from one of these points on this path to another. He'll just erratically move around each of them. And for Ninjant, I'm going to give him AI Patrol Ping Pong, actually. Which means he will go to the end of this path and then come back. Call that his path. Give him type monster. And there is one thing missing from this whole thing, and that is the encounter group. And we have a whole library of these. We have so many of these. Ninjant, something that uses a Ninjant. Not Evola. Not Lotus. I'll just use Ninjant times 3. Oops. Yes, reload it. And for you... Chris has to use like a document to find this stuff. I'll use Fuller Roach times 3 plus Chrysanthemum. Why not? I think that's a monster you probably haven't seen yet. Make sure this... That had better take this time, because I'm starting to get really frustrated. Maybe it exported to the wrong folder. Let me make sure it's... Nope, that's the right folder. Save over it. I'm going to make sure to close this right here. And now, if I hit import, I should see the monsters show up. There they are. It just drops them right in. And I'll take a look at them right now, just to make sure they got the right battle groups. Where the heck did it go? Right, it's on the battle trigger. Full Roach times 2 plus Chrysanthemum. Yep. And this one should be Ninjant times 3. Ninjant times 3, there we go. And now if I hit the play button... Hoping that you all find this interesting. And there goes the dog in the middle of a video. Probably somebody delivering a package. And there's that Ninjant. Kind of goofily sliding along, but we can fix his movement. I don't think he's supposed to actually walk like this. I think he's supposed to do something a little bit different, so he might not have been the best demonstration. Fuller Roach, though, is just hanging, chilling out here, moving in random directions. We've got a few more sophisticated behaviors that we're working on with regards to enemies chasing you. We need to sort out a little bit of the navmesh navigation in order to make sure all of that is working correctly. But the 16 beats are particularly going to chase you a bunch, whereas the Fuller Roaches will tend to be a little bit more chill. Ninjant, we definitely have more robust plans for him in mind. Him? Her? I guess most ants are girls. But now all I have to do is bump into them to initiate a battle, and I should see Alpha and White Hat drop into a fight with this trio of ninja ants. There they are. Yeah, you see them teleporting here. That's more reflective of how they're meant to move. They can be very disorienting. Yeah, backstab. You can block that, but it's very hard. Or maybe you can't block that. That might actually be the gimmick with these guys, is that they're so tricky and so stealthful. Their movement, almost invisible. But we're definitely going to make them a little more aggressive in the overworld. Because that's where a lot of the challenge really comes from. And then the Fuller Roach. And there's the Chrysanthemum. I'll let it attack. Just so we can see it. That probably needs to be balanced a little bit. Could use a few visual effects, I think. But it does get the idea across. Definitely needs the sound effects returned. Whoa! Whoa! I haven't seen encase work yet. We need to pause the animation, but other than that, that's cool, if you'll forgive the pun. Good job, Nathan. I'm really glad you got that status effect working correctly. And now I can heal myself. And that'll all just work. That'll warm you up, Alpha. After getting encased in ice. Wow. Okay. And that more or less covers how all that works. To give you an idea of how the monsters kind of disappear from the overworld, if I go up to the top level of them, we've got this base game entity script. That has all of the information on how the character saves its data when the scene transitions, or when you save and quit, or do anything like that. Every thing in the game has a GUID, a generated unique ID, and we auto-generate these now when we import, and when it kind of sets them up, it'll give a new GUID to every single object that needs it. And basically, every monster has should save state checked, and that'll determine whether it should be activated or deactivated. So if you win a battle, it will, remember to flag that enemy as being defeated and hide it. And then over time, we've got a means to unflag these enemies and, restore them. I think we're going to refactor that a little bit, where it's not going to be so permanent. It will flag that until you move into a next area, and then restore them when you come back. But right now, there isn't much of a distinction between leaving for the battle scene versus leaving for the other scenes in an area. So we really need to put in like temporary save data versus permanent save data. And then we've got story flags, and then we've got weekdays. So the progression is, there is a week in the game, and you do different days during that week. There's a day 1, day 2, all the way up through day 7, and different things are active on different days. And we can actually put in a list of these. So if we do week 1, day 3, and then separate it with commas with week 1, day 4, week 2, day 7, and whatnot. then on each of these days, that enemy will be active. But yeah, that's an overview of how the process is working so far. Over time, we'll have a larger and larger library of content to populate this with. We will, of course, refine the behavior of everything so that it's a bit more engaging, a little cooler to look at. Make these obstacles especially a bit more engaging as you run into these monsters. Oh yes, and one more little demonstration that I think that I want to make before we close out. I'm going to go ahead and open up one of the Fimicola Field regions. Let's make it room 3. We also set up backer fights here, and the system for doing backer fights is smart enough that we can put the trigger. We've got a little dummy object that determines what the battle actually is and controls the assignment of information to the triggers. And then we have little dummy characters that we put around that determine where the backers show up. And it'll actually fetch all of the information from the backers' battle group and use that to set them on the overworld for us. So very, very few moving parts involved in setting up the backer fights. And like with the enemies, we can just hit import and they will appear in the world exactly where we want them. So that should give you some insight as to how the backer groups fare. And they all have a consistent behavior, too. So, Fimicola... probably Fimicola 04, because we didn't have the naming convention down at that time. No, that's a different player group. I'll hit play, just so you can see them placed in the world in all of their glory. And here they are blocking my path, while those two chase themselves around in circles. This is one of my favorites of the early backer groups. These guys are pretty formidable. Defensive diamond. There's countercut. Now watch this. Wham! Denied. That makes him one of the most formidable opponents in the early game. We might need to adjust his AI a little, but then Alpha's got a fire move, which we might have overbuffed a little bit. When we were doing our tests in preparation for the stream the other day, Alpha's Vulcan Fist was a little broken and doing only about 2 damage. And we fixed it, and now it's doing way more than 2 damage, so we might need to adjust it. But that countercut, that is just so satisfying. I say that being the one getting beaten up by it. And now we come back here and they are ghosts. This is a common functionality to all of the backer characters, is that they know when they've been defeated. They have a special story flag assigned to them based on what group they're from, and if it's been flagged, they will be ghosts. This will, of course, not necessarily be the only time that you see these backer characters. 16-beat going bananas here on his patrol path. We made those pretty quick. This is like a Pirates of the Caribbean chase here. This is one of the more playful and goofy kind of setups for the enemies. But anyway, we'll cut it off here because I have now been recording for just about an hour. Probably filled up my hard drive doing this. But I hope you have enjoyed this insight into the process of setting up tome levels. As you can see, we can import these and set them up really, really, really quickly. We've got guides to every single one of them in terms of like maps showing what enemies to place where, what behaviors they should have, and so forth. We've got maps showing where all the backer characters get set up. We've got all of the information collected, and now that the pipeline is solidified this much, and is this simple and relatively clean of errors and moving parts, we can plow through the content chapter by chapter until all of the basics have been set up. Probably the most involved part of setting any of this up is getting all of the story content built, and I'm going to have a separate process video, I think, to showcase that with some of the early game cutscenes, because that's... I didn't want to do it in Jacksoni Jungle because that gets a little bit spoilery, if I can be honest. I might not be allowed to show the cutscenes that happen there. So I'll probably show off like some of the tutorial stuff in Fimicola Field later. But anyway, for right now, again, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to sharing more as the terrain turns. See you later, folks.